On August 9, 1942, two P-38Es of the 343rd Fighter Group, 11th Air Force, at the end of a 1,000-mile long-range patrol, happened upon a pair of Japanese Kawanishi H-6K Mavis flying boats and destroyed them, making them the first Japanese aircraft to be shot down by lightnings. This engagement over the frigid Aleutian waters, though modest in scale, marked a milestone in aerial warfare. The Japanese crews, confident in their aircraft's defensive armament and unaware of the P-38's existence, had maintained course when the strange twin-boomed silhouettes appeared. Within minutes, both flying boats were burning wreckage on the cold northern seas, victims of a fighter they hadn't known existed. 4.5 months later, on December 27, 1942, the morning air over New Guinea hung thick with tropical humidity as 12 P-38F Lightnings of the 39th Fighter Squadron sat on strip alert at their forward base. Among the pilots was First Lieutenant Kenneth Sparks, conducting his pre-flight check on P-38F serial number 42-12651. The aircraft's distinctive shark-mouth nose art grinned menacingly in the dawn light, while the blue spinners on the twin Allison engines caught the first rays of sun breaking through the jungle canopy. These fighters, still new to the theatre, represented a revolution in aerial warfare that would soon shatter Japanese assumptions about combat aviation. The pilots had been briefed the evening before by Captain Thomas Lynch, their squadron commander and already an ace with 5 victories earned the hard way in Bell P-39 Airacobras. Lynch, a thoughtful tactician who had survived the difficult early months of the war, understood the significance of what they were about to demonstrate. "Gentlemen," he had told his assembled pilots, "tomorrow we show the Japanese why the Lightning changes everything. Maintain altitude discipline. No one goes below 20,000 feet. Let them come to us. They can't. That's our advantage." At Rabaul, 400 miles to the northeast, the Imperial Japanese Navy's 11th Air Fleet had launched what they expected to be another routine mission. The strike force consisted of approximately 60 aircraft, Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, escorted by Mitsubishi A, 6M0 fighters, and Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar fighters of the Japanese Army Air Force. The mixed force reflected the inter-service cooperation that had become necessary as American resistance stiffened throughout New Guinea. Among the Zero pilots was Petty Officer First Class Kazuo Tsunoda, a veteran of the China campaign and the attack on Darwin. With 12 victories to his credit, Tsunoda embodied the confidence of Japanese naval aviation. His A6M3 Model 22, with its clipped wings for improved roll rate, represented the latest attempt to maintain the Zero's edge. Yet even these improvements couldn't alter the fundamental limitations that would soon prove fatal. The genesis of the P-38 Lightning traced back to a very different world, the United States of 1936, where isolationism still dominated political thought, and the Army Air Corps remained a neglected branch of service. In February 1937, the Air Corps issued Circular Proposal X608, calling for a high-altitude interceptor capable of 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet and armed with heavy firepower. The specification seemed impossibly ambitious. No existing fighter came close to these requirements. Lockheed's response, designed by a young engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson and his team, broke every convention of fighter design. Instead of trying to extract maximum performance from a single engine, they proposed twin Allison V1710 engines. Instead of a conventional fuselage, they created a central nacelle for the pilot and armament, connected to the engines by sleek booms that extended back to twin vertical stabilizers. The radical design promised to deliver the specified performance, but many doubted such an unconventional aircraft could succeed as a fighter. The prototype XP-38 first flew on January 27, 1939, with Lieutenant Benjamin Kelsey at the controls. The aircraft's performance immediately validated Johnson's radical approach. 2 weeks later, attempting to set a transcontinental speed record, Kelsey flew from California to New York in 7 hours and 2 minutes, only to crash land at Mitchell Field when his engines failed on approach. Despite this setback, the Army had seen enough. Orders followed for 13 YP-38 service test aircraft, then production contracts that would eventually total over 10,000 machines. What made the P-38 revolutionary wasn't just its unconventional appearance, but its comprehensive superiority across multiple performance parameters. The twin turbo-supercharged engines maintained power at altitudes where other fighters struggled to climb. While the Zero's Nakajima Sakai 21 engine produced 950 horsepower at sea level, dropping to barely 750 horsepower at 20,000 feet, the P-38's Allisons delivered consistent power up to 25,000 feet and beyond. This wasn't merely a quantitative advantage, it represented a qualitative transformation in what fighter aircraft could achieve. The turbo-supercharging system itself was a marvel of engineering that Japan couldn't replicate. Each engine featured a General Electric Type B turbo-supercharger that used exhaust gases to drive a turbine, which in turn compressed the incoming air. This maintained sea-level air pressure to the engine even at extreme altitudes. The complex system of wastegates, intercoolers and controls required metallurgy and precision manufacturing that pushed American industry to its limits and completely exceeded Japanese capabilities. The Lightning's armament represented another revolutionary advance. 4 Browning M 2.50 caliber machine guns and 1 Hispano M 220mm cannon, all concentrated in the nose, created a devastating cone of fire. Unlike wing-mounted guns that required careful convergence calculations and lost effectiveness at longer ranges, the P-38's parallel streams of fire remained concentrated at any distance. Japanese pilots, trained to close within 200 yards for their wing-mounted weapons to converge effectively, would find themselves under accurate fire at ranges exceeding 400 yards. As December 27th dawned over New Guinea, the stage was set for a confrontation that would send shockwaves through Japanese aviation. The morning patrol of P-38s had launched at 0600, climbing steadily into the brightening sky. Besides Captain Lynch and Lieutenant Bong, the formation included seasoned pilots like Lieutenant Ken Sparks and promising newcomers eager to prove themselves in the squadron's new mount. Richard Bong, temporarily assigned from the 9th Fighter Squadron while they awaited their own P-38s, represented the new generation of American fighter pilots. Born on a farm in Wisconsin, Bong had shown exceptional aptitude during training, though his instructors noted a tendency toward aggressive tactics that concerned them. In combat, that aggressiveness would make him America's ace of aces, but on this morning he was simply a young lieutenant about to experience his first combat in the aircraft that would make him famous. The Japanese formation approaching from Rabaul maintained standard doctrine: dive bombers at 15,000 feet with fighter escorts weaving above at 18,000 feet. The formation leader, Lieutenant Commander Kakuichi Takahashi, was a Pearl Harbor veteran who had led similar missions dozens of times. American resistance had been weakening for months as their inadequate P-39s and P-40s struggled to intercept at altitude. Today seemed no different. Alerted by coast watchers, those brave individuals who remained hidden on Japanese-occupied islands to report enemy movements, the P-38s had ample warning. The primitive but effective early warning network gave Lynch time to position his fighters perfectly. The Lightnings climbed through 20,000 feet, their turbo-superchargers maintaining power where normally aspirated engines would wheeze. At 25,000 feet they leveled off, circling like eagles above their prey. "Bogies! 2 o'clock low," called Lieutenant Charles Sullivan, another experienced pilot who had transitioned from P-39s. "Looks like about 20 bombers with fighter escort." Lynch's voice crackled over the radio. "I see them. Maintain altitude advantage. We'll make one pass through the fighters, then go for the bombers. Remember your training. No turning fights." Below them, the Japanese formation droned on, unaware of the threat circling 7,000 feet above. The Zero pilots, weaving in their protective pattern, scanned the skies at their own altitude and below, standard procedure that had worked for 2 years. None looked high enough to spot the P-38s against the morning sun. Petty Officer Tsunoda first noticed something wrong when his wingman suddenly exploded without warning. As he jerked his head around trying to spot the threat, he saw them. Strange twin-boomed shapes plummeting from above at tremendous speed. His startled radio call alerted the formation, but it was already too late. Captain Lynch had rolled inverted and pulled through, lining up a Ki-43 Oscar in his gun sight. At 300 yards, he opened fire. The concentrated firepower of the P-38, all guns firing along parallel paths, literally sawed the Oscar in half. The Japanese fighter's 2 halves tumbled separately toward the jungle below. Lieutenant Bong, following Lynch's example, selected a Zero that was desperately trying to climb to meet the attack. The Japanese fighter, already at its service ceiling, wallowed helplessly as Bong's guns found their mark. The Zero exploded in a ball of orange flame, marking Bong's first victory in what would become a legendary combat career. First Lieutenant Kenneth Sparks dove on another element, his P-38 accelerating past 400 miles per hour. At this speed, the Zero's controls became almost immovable, a phenomenon known as control stiffening that Japanese pilots had discovered to their dismay. The fabric-covered control surfaces simply couldn't overcome the aerodynamic forces at high speed. The Lightning, with its metal construction and hydraulically boosted controls in later models, remained responsive. Sparks triggered a long burst into a diving Zero, watching his tracers converge on the target. The Japanese fighter's fuel tanks, lacking self-sealing features to save weight, ignited instantly. As Sparks pulled up from his attack, using the Lightning's superior climb rate to regain altitude, a second Zero attempted to follow, but stalled in the thin air, falling away in an uncontrolled spin. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes, but felt like hours to the participants. When the P-38s reformed at altitude, the Japanese formation was scattered, with burning wreckage falling toward the jungle. The American pilots claimed 11 kills overall, though post-war analysis suggests the actual number was probably 7 or 8. Ken Sparks's aircraft had taken significant damage from return fire, and he was forced to crash land at Dobodura, walking away with minor injuries. The technical superiority demonstrated in this engagement reflected fundamental differences in design philosophy and industrial capability. Japanese designers, working within severe material constraints, had pursued maximum maneuverability through minimal weight. The Zero lacked armor protection for the pilot, self-sealing fuel tanks, and even a radio in many cases, all sacrificed for performance. This philosophy had worked when facing inferior opposition, but proved fatal against the P-38. American engineers took a different approach entirely. The P-38 was built for survivability as much as performance. Pilot armor protected against rifle-caliber rounds. Self-sealing fuel tanks could absorb multiple hits without catching fire. The robust construction could withstand battle damage that would destroy lighter aircraft. This wasn't over-engineering. It was recognition that pilot survival mattered as much as aircraft performance. The turbo-supercharging system deserves special attention, as it represented technology Japan simply couldn't match. The challenges involved were enormous. The turbo-supercharger itself operated at temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, requiring special alloys to survive. The complex system of ducting, intercoolers, and wastegates had to function perfectly in conditions ranging from Arctic cold to tropical heat. General Electric's engineers had solved these problems through years of development, creating a system that gave the P-38 unmatched high-altitude performance. 4 days later, on December 31st, 1942, Ken Sparks was back in action despite his recent crash landing. The young lieutenant had spent the intervening days helping his crew chief repair battle damage to other squadron aircraft, learning firsthand about the P-38's robust construction. Now, strapped into P-38F serial number 42-12652. He was part of another interception mission as Japanese forces attempted a New Year's Eve strike on Allied positions. The mission began routinely, with radar, another technological advantage the Japanese lacked, providing early warning of the incoming raid. The P-38s climbed to their preferred altitude, circling as they waited for the enemy to come within range. This time, however, the Japanese had adjusted their tactics, keeping their fighters higher than usual in an attempt to counter the Lightning's altitude advantage. As the two forces merged, Sparks found himself in a head-on confrontation with a determined Zero pilot. Both aircraft charged at each other, neither giving way. In such encounters, the P-38's concentrated nose armament gave it a significant advantage. All its firepower could be brought to bear while the Zero's wing guns wouldn't converge until much closer range. At the last possible moment, with collision seeming inevitable, the Japanese pilot banked hard left. But he had misjudged either the distance or the P-38's wingspan. His wing clipped Sparks' aircraft, tearing several feet from the Lightning's right wingtip. The impact was catastrophic for the Zero. Its lighter construction couldn't withstand the collision. The entire wing separated, and the Japanese fighter spiraled helplessly into the jungle below. Sparks fought to control his damaged aircraft. The P-38's twin-engine configuration, which had seemed unnecessarily complex to critics, now proved its worth. Despite the asymmetric damage, he could adjust power between the engines to maintain some control. Wrestling with the controls, he managed to nurse the damaged Lightning back to Dobodura for another crash landing, his second in 5 days. He had scored 2 victories that day despite the collision and walked away with only bruises, protected by the P-38's sturdy cockpit structure. This incident highlighted another P-38 advantage often overlooked: the tricycle landing gear configuration. Unlike the Zero's tail-dragger arrangement, which required careful handling on landing and was prone to ground loops, the P-38's nose wheel made landing safer and easier, especially when damaged. This seemingly minor detail meant pilots were more likely to survive forced landings, preserving experienced aircrew. The psychological impact on Japanese naval aviation extended far beyond immediate combat losses. For 2 years, the Zero had embodied Japanese technological prowess and the superiority of Yamamoto Damashi, the Japanese spirit. Naval aviators had built their entire identity around their aircraft's invincibility. The Lightning didn't just defeat them in combat, it shattered their worldview. Lieutenant Masashi Makino, a squadron leader at Rabaul, wrote in his personal diary in January 1943, later captured when Rabaul fell, "The twin-tailed fighters have changed everything. Our young pilots are terrified before they even take off. They know that somewhere above them, beyond our ability to reach or see, the Americans are waiting. We who were hunters have become hunted prey. I fear for the future of our naval aviation." The technical intelligence war intensified as both sides sought to understand the other's capabilities. Japanese efforts to examine crashed P-38s revealed the true extent of American technological superiority. A technical report prepared by the Naval Air Technical Arsenal in February 1943, based on examination of wreckage, noted with dismay the quality of American manufacturing. Every component shows evidence of mass production to extremely tight tolerances. The engine bearings are manufactured to specifications we cannot achieve. The electrical systems use materials we cannot obtain. The hydraulic systems operate at pressures our equipment cannot match. Most significantly, the turbo-supercharging system represents technology we estimate would require 5 years to duplicate, assuming we had access to the necessary raw materials and machine tools. This report, classified at the highest levels, was never widely distributed as it was deemed too demoralizing. But among the technical staff who read it, the conclusion was inescapable. Japan had fallen irretrievably behind in the technology race. The human dimension of this technological mismatch became increasingly tragic as 1943 progressed. Japanese pilot training, once the world's most rigorous, collapsed under the pressure of mounting losses. The elaborate 2-year program that had produced superb pilots was compressed first to 1 year, then 6 months, finally to mere weeks for desperately needed replacements. Ensign Ichiro Yamada, a composite character based on multiple accounts, arriving at Rabaul in March 1943, exemplified the new reality. With only 150 hours total flight time and minimal combat training, he was expected to face American pilots with 3 times his experience flying aircraft that outclassed his Zero in every measurable parameter. His first combat mission was also his last, shot down by P-38s he never saw, attacking from an altitude he couldn't reach. The maintenance and logistic superiority of American forces proved equally decisive, but less visible. P-38 squadrons consistently maintained operational rates exceeding 75%, despite the complexity of twin-engine operations in primitive conditions. This reliability stemmed from systematic approaches to maintenance that seemed revolutionary to Japanese observers. Master Sergeant Frank Chen, a crew chief with the 81st Fighter Squadron, exemplified American maintenance excellence. His meticulously kept records showed every component change, every inspection, every minor adjustment. "The tech manual is the Bible," he told new mechanics. "Follow it exactly and the bird will fly. Take shortcuts and pilots die." This systematic approach, replicated across hundreds of crew chiefs, kept P-38s flying when Japanese units struggled to maintain half their aircraft operational. The spare parts system supporting P-38 operations represented industrial organization on a scale Japan had never achieved. From Lockheed's factory in Burbank, California, parts flowed through an elaborate distribution network to forward bases throughout the Pacific. Critical components were airshipped, arriving within days of being ordered. Routine supplies came by Liberty ship convoys protected by the very air superiority the P-38s provided. The Japanese Navy's desperate attempts to address the spare parts crisis revealed the depth of their industrial disadvantage. Where American squadrons received standardized components that fit perfectly, Japanese mechanics often spent hours hand-filing parts to fit individual aircraft. The Zero's Sakai engine, theoretically standardized, varied significantly between production batches. Mechanics reported that parts from one engine often wouldn't fit another supposedly identical unit without extensive modification. By contrast, the P-38's Allison engines were marvels of standardization. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, an engine specialist with the 8th Fighter Squadron, could rebuild an entire engine using parts from multiple sources without adjustment. "Everything was interchangeable," he recalled after the war. "Bearings, pistons, connecting rods, all manufactured to the same precise specifications. We could cannibalize 3 wrecked engines to build one good one in hours, not days." The strategic implications of the P-38's range became apparent as American operations expanded throughout 1943. With drop tanks, Lightnings could escort bombers to targets previously thought safe from fighter interference. Japanese bases that had operated with impunity suddenly found themselves under attack. The psychological impact of nowhere being safe from American fighters further demoralized Japanese forces. One such mission on March 2, 1943, demonstrated the P-38's strategic reach. 16 Lightnings of the 39th Fighter Squadron escorted B-17 flying fortresses to attack Japanese shipping at Wewak, over 500 miles from their base. The Japanese, believing themselves beyond fighter range, had concentrated ships and aircraft at the harbour. The appearance of P-38s over Wewak sent shockwaves through Japanese command. Their last safe harbour was safe no longer. During this mission, Lieutenant Richard Suhr encountered his first combat in the P-38 after transitioning from P-39s. As he dove on a scrambling Zero trying to take off from Wewak airfield, he marvelled at the Lightning's stability in the high-speed dive. In the P-39, you felt like you were riding a bucking bronco, he later recalled. The P-38 was like driving a Cadillac, smooth, powerful, completely under control even at 450 miles per hour. The Yamamoto mission on April 18, 1943, elevated the P-38 from tactical superiority to strategic weapon. The mission parameters seemed impossible. Intercept a specific aircraft at a specific time after flying 435 miles at wave-top height to avoid detection. Only the P-38 had the range, navigation capability, and performance to accomplish this feat. Major John Mitchell, leading the mission, had spent days planning every detail. Fuel consumption was calculated to the gallon. Navigation was plotted to account for wind drift over hundreds of miles of open ocean. The timing had to be perfect. Arrive too early and Yamamoto wouldn't be there. Too late, and he would have landed under protection of base defenses. 16 P-38s launched from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, maintaining strict radio silence. Flying just 50 feet above the waves to avoid radar detection, the pilots fought fatigue and monotony for over 2 hours. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, with no landmarks to confirm their navigation. Everything depended on Mitchell's calculations and the reliability of their aircraft. Lieutenant Rex Barber, flying in the killer section tasked with attacking Yamamoto's bomber, later described the tension. "We flew for what seemed like forever, seeing nothing but water. I kept checking my fuel gauges, wondering if Mitchell's calculations were right. Then, exactly when he said they would be, the mountains of Bougainville appeared ahead. 30 seconds later, we spotted the bombers. The interception unfolded with precision. Yamamoto's 2 G4M Betty bombers, escorted by 6 Zeros, appeared exactly where expected. The P-38s dropped their external tanks and accelerated to attack speed. In the ensuing combat, both bombers were shot down, with Yamamoto's aircraft crashing in the jungle. The architect of Pearl Harbor was dead, killed by the very technology he had dismissed as inferior to Japanese spirit. The psychological impact throughout Japanese forces was devastating. If Admiral Yamamoto, protected by the best pilots and fighters available, could be hunted down with such precision, no one was safe. The myth of Japanese superiority, already cracking, shattered completely. More than any single combat, the Yamamoto mission demonstrated that the Pacific War had become America's to lose. The human cost of technological inferiority accelerated through 1943. Japanese replacement pilots arrived at combat units with minimal training, often having fired their guns only a handful of times. Against experienced American pilots flying superior aircraft, they had life expectancies measured in weeks, sometimes days. Lieutenant Yukio Seki, who would later lead the first official kamikaze attack, wrote to his wife in mid-1943 while still flying conventional missions. "The new pilots arrive looking like children. They can barely fly formation, much less fight. We send them up against the American twin-engine fighters knowing they won't return. It is murder, not war. I fear what desperate measures our leaders will demand when even these sacrifices fail." The maintenance crisis deepened as experienced technicians became casualties or were drafted for pilot training. Master mechanics who had spent years learning their craft were replaced by teenagers with weeks of training. The intricate systems of the Zero, manageable with experienced hands, became death traps when maintained by novices. Chief Petty Officer Yamamoto, no relation to the Admiral, a veteran mechanic at Rabaul, despaired at the quality of replacements. "They don't understand the engine, only which bolts to turn. When something goes wrong, they have no idea why. I spend more time fixing their mistakes than maintaining aircraft. Pilots die because boys are doing men's work." Meanwhile, American pilot training expanded and improved continuously. By mid-1943, new P-38 pilots arrived in theater with over 500 hours total time, including at least 100 hours in type. They had practiced high-altitude combat, engine-out procedures, long-range navigation, and combat tactics developed from actual combat experience. The 475th Fighter Group, activated in Australia in May 1943, exemplified American organizational superiority. Designated from inception as a P-38 unit, the group trained exclusively on lightning tactics. Veterans from other squadrons provided combat experience, while new pilots brought fresh training on the latest procedures. Within months, the 475th was achieving victory ratios exceeding 10-1. Major Thomas Maguire, who would become America's second highest scoring ace, joined the 475th in July 1943. His approach to combat was methodical, almost scientific. The P-38 gives us every advantage if we use it properly. Speed, altitude, firepower, range. Never give up any of these advantages. The Zero is dangerous only if you fight on its terms. Don't. This tactical discipline, enabled by the P-38's performance, produced remarkable results. On August 21, 1943, Maguire shot down 5 Japanese aircraft in a single mission without taking a hit. His combat reports read like physics lessons: energy management, angle calculations, speed differentials. The romantic age of aerial combat had given way to systematic destruction. Japanese attempts to develop counters to the P-38 revealed both ingenuity and desperation. The Kawasaki Ki-45 Nick twin-engine fighter seemed a logical response, but it lacked the P-38's altitude performance and proved vulnerable to lightning attacks. The Nakajima Ki-84 Frank showed more promise with improved altitude capability, but arrived too late and in insufficient numbers. The technological investigations of crashed P-38s became increasingly frantic. A report from the Army Aerotechnical Research Institute in Tokyo, dated September 1943, noted, "The enemy turbo-supercharger system employs metallurgy we cannot duplicate. The exhaust turbine blades use alloys requiring materials we do not possess. Even if we could obtain these materials, we lack the industrial capacity to produce such systems in quantity. We estimate a 5-year development program would be required to match current American capability." The F-5 photo reconnaissance variant of the P-38 added insult to injury. These unarmed lightnings photographed Japanese positions daily, flying too high and fast for interception. Every movement was observed, every concentration of forces recorded. The feeling of being constantly watched added psychological pressure to material disadvantages. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, the controversial staff officer, wrote in a private letter, "The American photo planes mock us daily. They fly over our positions with impunity, photographing everything. We know that within hours their commanders will study these photos, planning our destruction. We operate without secrets while they hide in shadows. This is not warfare as we understood it." The impact on ground forces was equally severe. Japanese troops learned that P-38 presence meant incoming attacks. The Lightning's ability to carry bombs and rockets in addition to its guns made it a formidable ground attack aircraft. The concentrated nose armament proved devastating against soft targets, while the aircraft's speed and maneuverability made it difficult for anti-aircraft gunners to track. Sergeant Hiroshi Tanaka, an anti-aircraft gunner with the 51st Division, described the frustration. "The twin-tailed devils would appear without warning, diving from heights our guns couldn't reach. By the time we could react, they were already pulling up, climbing back to safety. Our 25mm guns were designed to engage aircraft at 3,000 meters. The P-38s attacked from twice that height." The bomber escort missions that became the P-38's primary role demonstrated strategic impact beyond fighter-versus-fighter combat. B-24 Liberators, previously limited to night operations or prohibitive losses, could now strike Japanese bases in daylight. The steady degradation of Japanese infrastructure accelerated as accurate daylight bombing replaced ineffective night raids. On November 2, 1943, 5th Air Force B-25 Mitchell medium bombers, escorted by P-38s, executed a devastating low-level attack on Rabaul Harbor. The Japanese scrambled every available fighter, but the escorting Lightnings handled them with ruthless efficiency. The bomber losses were minimal, while Japanese fighter strength was further depleted. More importantly, the attack demonstrated that Rabaul, the bastion of Japanese air power, could no longer protect itself. The logistics network supporting these operations showcased American organizational genius. Forward bases maintained fuel farms with hundreds of thousands of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel. Ammunition depots held millions of rounds. Spare parts warehouses stocked everything from spark plugs to complete engines. This material abundance, invisible but essential, enabled the sustained operations that ground down Japanese resistance. Lieutenant Colonel Charles MacDonald, who would become the third-ranking American ace with 27 victories, took command of the 475th Fighter Group in late 1943. His leadership style emphasized systematic excellence over individual heroics. "We're not trying to create aces. We're trying to destroy enemy air power. Every pilot who returns safely can fly tomorrow. Every Japanese pilot we kill is one they can't replace. It's mathematics, not glory." This philosophy, enabled by the P-38's survivability, produced steady attrition of Japanese air power. American pilots could be aggressive knowing their aircraft would protect them. Self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plate, and robust construction meant many pilots survived encounters that would have been fatal in other aircraft. Experience accumulated while Japanese experience died. The navigation equipment advantage multiplied American effectiveness. P-38s carried radio compasses that could home on beacons from hundreds of miles away. Precise chronometers enabled accurate navigation over water. Radio altimeters provided exact height above terrain. These instruments, taken for granted by American pilots, seemed miraculous to Japanese aviators still relying on magnetic compasses and visual navigation. Captain Robert de Haven, who scored 14 victories in P-38s, recalled a mission where weather closed in unexpectedly. "We were 300 miles from base with solid clouds below. In any other aircraft, we'd have been in serious trouble. But I tuned in the radio beacon, set my course, and flew through the weather knowing exactly where I was." The Japanese pilots we captured told us they would have been forced to bail out in similar conditions. The communication advantage proved equally decisive. American P-38s operated with reliable VHF radios, enabling complex coordinated tactics. Flight leaders could control multiple elements, vectoring them onto targets or warning of threats. Ground controllers, using radar, could guide P-38s to intercept enemy formations beyond visual range. This integrated system multiplied the effectiveness of individual aircraft. By contrast, Japanese radios remained notoriously unreliable. Many pilots flew with inoperative sets or removed them entirely to save weight. Communication depended on hand signals and pre-briefed plans that couldn't adapt to changing situations. This isolation in combat reduced tactical flexibility and increased losses to coordinated American attacks. The impact on Japanese strategic planning became evident in the decision to abandon Rabaul. Once the bastion of Japanese air power, the base became untenable under constant P-38 attack. The February 1944 decision to withdraw remaining aircraft marked tacit admission that air superiority had passed permanently to the Americans. Without air cover, the garrison of over 100,000 troops was effectively marooned. Admiral Junichi Kusaka, commander at Rabaul, made the painful decision. "We cannot maintain aircraft here under constant enemy fighter attack. Every plane we send is destroyed, every pilot lost. Better to preserve what remains for defense of the inner perimeter than waste them in futile gestures." The cultural impact extended beyond military circles. Letters from Japanese pilots, censored during the war but discovered afterward, revealed the psychological transformation. The confident warriors of 1941 had become fatalistic young men by 1943, writing final farewells before each mission. Lieutenant Fujio Kuroki wrote to his parents in December 1943, "The enemy's twin-engine fighters have made our sacrifice meaningless. We take off knowing we cannot reach them, cannot fight them, cannot escape them. I die not for victory, but because I am ordered. Please remember me as I was before this war made death our only duty." The maintenance training programs developed for the P-38 set new standards. Unlike Japanese apprenticeship systems that took years to produce competent mechanics, American programs produced qualified technicians in months. The key was systematic instruction focused on understanding principles rather than rote memorization. Technical schools in the United States churned out thousands of trained mechanics who understood hydraulics, electronics, and engine theory. They arrived in theater with standardized skills that could be immediately applied. This industrial approach to training, like production itself, overwhelmed Japanese capacity to compete. The spare parts manufacturing system deserves special attention. Thousands of subcontractors across America produced components to exacting specifications. A bearing manufacturer in Detroit, a hydraulic valve producer in Los Angeles, an electrical component factory in Chicago, all contributed to a vast network supporting frontline operations. Quality control ensured interchangeability that seemed miraculous to Japanese observers. This distributed production also provided resilience. No single factory was critical. Production could shift seamlessly if facilities were damaged or overloaded. Japan's concentrated production in a few facilities proved vulnerable to the very bombing campaigns that P-38s would eventually escort. By early 1944, the transformation of Pacific air warfare was complete. Japanese pilots no longer spoke of victory, but of delaying defeat. The appearance of P-38s over a battlefield meant tactical defeat was certain. The only question was the cost. Ground commanders learned to expect no air support while assuming enemy air attack. General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, preparing for the defense of the Philippines, acknowledged reality in a staff conference. "We must plan without air support. The enemy's fighters, especially the twin-engine type, have made our aircraft irrelevant. We will fight as infantry fought before aircraft existed, because for practical purposes, we have no air force." The pilot rotation system that brought experienced Americans home to train newcomers created exponential advantages. Veterans like Richard Bong returned to the United States after their combat tours, sharing hard-won knowledge with hundreds of trainees. Their lectures weren't theoretical. They spoke from experience about exactly how to fight Japanese aircraft. Captain Bong, on a training tour in early 1944, emphasized practical over theoretical knowledge. "Forget what you learned about dogfighting. The P-38 isn't a dogfighter. It's a boom and zoom killer. One pass, one kill, extend and climb. If you miss, don't turn back. Climb, reset, attack again. The Zero can't follow you up, and that's your life insurance." This institutional learning meant each new pilot arrived better prepared than his predecessors. Training syllabi incorporated latest combat experience within weeks of its occurrence. Mock combats pitted students against instructors simulating Japanese tactics. By the time new pilots reached combat units, they had already fought dozens of simulated battles. The Japanese training system, by contrast, collapsed into expedient measures that produced pilots barely able to fly, much less fight. The elaborate spiritual preparation that had characterized pre-war training gave way to rushed technical instruction. New pilots learned to take off and land, to fly basic formations, and little else. Combat training was minimal. Ammunition was too scarce for live-fire exercises. Ensign Kiyoshi Ogawa, arriving at Clark Field in the Philippines in October 1944, exemplified the new reality. With 80 hours total flight time and having fired his guns exactly twice, he was expected to face American pilots with 10 times his experience. His diary, recovered after the war, revealed his despair. "I am not a pilot, but a sacrifice. My death will accomplish nothing except to add one more number to our losses." The technological investigations continued as Japanese engineers desperately sought ways to counter the P-38. A captured P-38G, relatively intact after a forced landing, was exhaustively studied at the Army Air Technical Research Laboratory. The subsequent report revealed both admiration and despair at American engineering. The construction employs flush riveting throughout, reducing drag significantly. The control surfaces use sealed bearings we cannot manufacture. The electrical system employs automatic circuit breakers unknown to our technology. Most significantly, the engines show evidence of mass production to tolerances we achieve only in laboratory conditions. This is not simply a superior aircraft. It represents industrial capabilities we cannot match. The night fighter variant of the P-38, equipped with primitive radar, added another dimension to American superiority. While never as successful as purpose-built night fighters like the P-61 Black Widow, radar-equipped P-38s could hunt Japanese aircraft attempting night operations. The psychological impact of being vulnerable even in darkness further demoralized Japanese aviators. Lieutenant Kenji Yoshida, flying night reconnaissance missions in a modified Zero, encountered a radar-equipped P-38 in March 1944. "I was flying in complete darkness, feeling safe in the night. Suddenly tracers appeared from nowhere. The American had found me without seeing me. I dove desperately, using darkness and clouds to escape. But how do you hide from an enemy who sees in the dark?" The impact on Japanese naval planning was profound. Carrier operations, the heart of Japanese naval strategy, became increasingly difficult as P-38s extended their reach. Carriers operating within lightning range faced devastating attacks. The mobility that had been the carrier's greatest asset became a liability when American long-range fighters could find and attack them hundreds of miles from land bases. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, preparing for what would become the Battle of Leyte Gulf, lamented the transformation. "Our carriers are floating targets for enemy land-based fighters. We who invented carrier warfare now find our ships hunted by aircraft we cannot match. The P-38s force us to operate beyond their range, reducing our own effectiveness. We are caught in a trap of our own making." The weather reconnaissance role, though unglamorous, proved strategically important. P-38S could climb above tropical weather systems, reporting conditions that affected operational planning. This capability, combined with superior meteorological training, gave American forces significant advantages in timing operations. Colonel David Lee, Tex Hill, transitioning from the Flying Tigers to P-38s, appreciated this advantage. "In China, we flew when weather permitted. With the P-38, we could check weather conditions hundreds of miles away, plan accordingly. The Japanese were still guessing at weather, while we had reconnaissance flights telling us exactly what was coming." The bomber offensive that ultimately crippled Japanese industry depended heavily on P-38 escorts. B-29 superfortresses, operating from China and later the Marianas, initially suffered heavy losses to Japanese interceptors. The arrival of P-38s with sufficient range to provide escort changed the equation. Japanese fighters, forced to engage the escorts before reaching the bombers, suffered prohibitive losses. Major General Curtis LeMay, commanding B-29 operations, acknowledged the P-38's contribution. "The Lightning gave us the shield we needed. Japanese fighters had to come up to engage them, exposing themselves to our escort's superior performance. Once we had reliable escort, we could systematically destroy Japanese industry. The P-38 made strategic bombing possible." The final year of the war saw the P-38's dominance absolute. Japanese pilots openly avoided combat when lightnings appeared. Ground forces dug deeper, knowing that P-38 presence meant devastating attacks would follow. The distinctive twin-boom silhouette had become a symbol of American technological superiority, that demoralized by its mere presence. Lieutenant General Kyoji Tominaga, commanding Japanese air forces in the Philippines during the American invasion, reported to Tokyo, "Enemy P-38 fighters appear at will over our airfields. We cannot prevent them from destroying our aircraft on the ground. Our pilots, when they dare to take off, are shot down before they can engage. We are not fighting a battle. We are simply being eliminated." The human legacy lived beyond the war's end. American P-38 pilots formed lasting bonds, united by their shared experience of flying the aircraft that revolutionized Pacific air combat. Annual reunions celebrated survival made possible by superior technology. Japanese veterans carried different burdens, questions about the meaning of their sacrifice against impossible odds. In 1985, at a Pacific War symposium in Hawaii, former adversaries met in reconciliation. Former P-38 ace Gerald Johnson shook hands with former Zero pilot Kaname Harada. Their brief exchange captured the essence of the Pacific Air War. Johnson said simply, "We were lucky to have the better plane." Harada replied, "We were unlucky to face it." But perhaps the most poignant meeting occurred between Richard Bong's widow and Saburo Sakai at an air show in 1988. The Japanese ace, who had survived the war despite severe wounds, told her, "Your husband flew the aircraft that defeated us. Not through superior courage, we had courage too, but through superior technology that made our courage irrelevant. He was a warrior of the new age. We were relics of the past." The industrial legacy transformed post-war development. Japan, forced to confront technological inferiority, embraced systematic quality control and continuous improvement, lessons learned from encountering American industrial superiority. The humiliation of being overwhelmed by superior technology motivated a generation to excel in peaceful competition. Dr. Soichiro Honda, founder of Honda Motors, often cited his wartime experience. "I examined crashed P-38s, marveling at the precision, the materials, the systematic engineering. Everything was standardized, interchangeable, built to specifications we couldn't imagine. I vowed that someday Japan would build products of equal quality. The P-38 taught us that excellence comes from systems, not individual effort." December 27, 1942, marked more than a tactical victory. It was the day the future arrived in the skies over New Guinea. The Japanese pilots who survived carried news that would ripple through their entire military establishment. The Americans had not simply built a better fighter, they had created a system of technological dominance that would systematically destroy Japanese military power. In the decades since, military historians have analyzed every aspect of the Pacific Air War. Statistics tell part of the story. The P-38 destroyed more Japanese aircraft than any other American fighter. But numbers alone cannot capture the transformation the Lightning represented. It was the physical manifestation of American industrial might, the proof that technology could overcome tradition, that systems could defeat spirit. The pilots who flew the P-38 knew they held overwhelming advantage. This knowledge bred confidence that became self-fulfilling. Japanese pilots, knowing they faced superior aircraft, flew with fatalism that ensured defeat. The psychological advantage multiplied the technological edge into comprehensive dominance. Today, restored P-38s fly at air shows, their distinctive shape still turning heads. The sound of their Allison engines, the whistle of their turbo-superchargers, evokes memories of when they ruled Pacific skies. For those who flew them, they remain the aircraft that won the war. For those who faced them, they symbolize the moment when everything changed. The lightning had struck on that December morning in 1942, and nothing would ever be the same. The age of the samurai in the sky had ended, replaced by the age of technology and industrial might. In that transformation lay lessons about warfare, progress, and the price of falling behind in the race of nations. The P-38 Lightning remains not just a successful fighter aircraft, but a symbol of how technology, properly applied, can render obsolete everything that came before.